Um, Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name's Colleen from Soil Association Scotland. We are going to talk about whole farm planning today and hear from a farmer who's doing whole farm planning and what that means and what that looks like on the ground. Um, and let's see if the slides work. There we go. So, welcome to the Whole Farm Planning webinar. This is the first webinar in a series that's going to carry on over the next 18 months with farm walks, webinars, videos, blogs, practical guides to kind of unpick and look at in more detail what the whole farm plan requirements are from Scottish Government, but also, what you're collecting all this data, what can you do with it that benefits your farm? So this is just the web page that we'll share a link to in the chat at either just now or at the end. And we'll kind of look at the 5 key areas today and what that looks like in practice. But we'll share a link to this web page so that you can keep an eye on it for the rest of the events and things that are coming in the new year. So just a quick look at the agenda. We'll do a quick poll in a minute just to kind of get a sense of where people are coming from. How much do you feel like you know already? What would you like to know a bit more of? Kind of look at whole farm planning, what the requirements are, what some of the benefits or considerations might be, what that looks like in practice. And then we're going to hear from John Seed, who's our guest today from Wood End Farm, to look at what does whole farm planning look like in practice from his point of view. And then we've got a bit of time for discussion and question and answers. So if people have got questions, feel free to put those in the chat. Use the chat function to introduce yourselves to each other. What's your name? What do you do? Where are you based? Is it frosty with you today? It's still frosty in the central belt here. So use the chat function for questions and we'll come to them after the presentations, and then we'll do another quick poll at the end to see how people are feeling with the information that we've looked at. And yeah, this is the first of a series over the next 18 months of webinars and events and resources and things. So it'd be great to get folks' input into, are there sort of particular questions or topics that you really want more detail on, or people that you want to hear from, or platforms, for sort of carbon footprinting platforms, or animal health and welfare tools or something like that. Any ideas like that, send them over to us. So whole farm planning, this program has kind of come off the back of requirements coming out of Scottish Government for receiving basic payments from next year, from the middle of May next year. Everybody will have to do whole farm planning elements from the start of next year, and there's more information coming through from Farm Advisory Service and Scottish Government, but we thought it'd be a useful thing to kind of break it down and see what does it look like in practice, what do people need to do. And so the content of this kind of today and the programme is kind of split into two, looking at what are the requirements that people have to do, and then once you have that data that you're collecting or starting to collect, what can you do with it to make your farm more resilient and benefit your business? If you're sort of collecting lots of data, you might as well use it to your best advantage if you can. So that's our kind of aims, and the kind of purpose of it from Scottish Government's point of view is to help and encourage farmers and enable farmers to collect data that they can then use themselves to be more productive and profitable. So for the first few years, there won't be a requirement to submit the data in your plans and audits, but they want people to be collecting data on soil carbon, the different elements, and start using it on your own farm, your own croft, and kind of benchmark against yourself. And this is the start of benchmarking. to start collecting that data so that you can see change or see where there might be areas where you could implement change, or see if you're going in the right direction. So the whole farm plan looks at 5 areas that Scottish Government is keen that farms kind of are sustainable on, and can measure how sustainable they are in these 5 areas. So it covers carbon, soil, biodiversity, IPM as integrated pest management, and animal health and welfare. So these 5 areas won't apply to everybody. If you don't have livestock, you won't need to do the animal health and welfare plan. If you are organic as well, there's a couple of them that you will already be doing, and I'll go into that in a wee bit more detail. So this is the 5 areas that they want to be sort of benchmarking and baselining against, and to kind of get people starting to collect data on. And this is broken down a little bit more. So for 3 of them, it's every 5 years. The soil analysis, carbon audit, and habitat survey should be done every 5 years, and the integrated pest management plan and animal health and welfare plans are annual ones, and so they will apply to some people and not others. And I'm going to go into these different areas in a wee bit more detail as we go along. Jane, if you're able to pop in the chat a couple of links to more information. We're recording this session, but we're also going to send out a follow-up email with all of the links and things that I talk about. So don't worry about trying to find information just now. We're writing things down, because we will send out all the information afterwards as well, with the slides. But some of the kind of hoped for benefits of doing these analyses and audits are things like improving soil health and productivity. A big one that kind of runs through a couple of these is trying to reduce chemical inputs, the cost of which have skyrocketed, but they also contribute to emissions, and contributing towards supporting biodiversity, rebuilding biodiversity, and habitat. And then for IPM and animal health and welfare, improving efficiency, improving welfare, reducing emissions, that comes through a lot of those, and improving profitability and resilience of a business kind of runs through all of these as a theme. And I think John will be able to kind of talk a bit more to some of those. So some of the kind of key points to note for these: if you are organic, your IPM plan and animal health and welfare plan are already covered through your crop management plan and animal health plan. So if you're already organic and have these plans in place, then you don't need to worry about doing any of the others if you're not ready to, because you're already covered there. Some of these are already covered if you're in a quality assurance scheme, like QMS, Red Tractor. Some of these will already be covered. In the first few years, the content, none of the content of these will be checked. I don't think you need to also submit copies of like a soil analysis, for example, but you need to have it available in case you get inspected. So you need to keep the records of the plans and audits that you've done, just in case you get audited, but you don't need to upload them at this point. But I think the plan will be that in the future, you might have to demonstrate, for example, improvement in soil quality through soil organic matter or nutrient status, or improving your carbon footprint, for example. But this is the kind of breakdown of the 5 areas and how often you need to do a plan. So for soil analysis, this applies to Region 1 fields. So if you're not Region 1 fields, they still recommend that you do soil analyses on some of your fields, but it is mandatory for Region 1 fields which are getting organic or inorganic fertilizers or manures. These are the fields that are being prioritised that have to have soil sampling. And by 2028, you'll need to demonstrate that all of your fields have been sampled over a 5-year period. If you already have soil analysis for some of your fields from within the last 5 years, then those will count if they're still valid on the 15th of May next year. And then by 2028, nutrient management planning will also come in, and I think will be mandatory from 2028. So the first few years will just be testing soil, and then from 2028 there'll be the need to do nutrient management planning as well. And these pictures are a little bit small, but just a sort of example of what a soil analysis can look like. There's a lot of information on the FAS website and the Scottish Government website, links to sort of further information. So that link that Jane popped in the chat there is a useful place to start if you haven't done soil sampling before, of different places that you can send a soil sample, how to take a soil sample yourself, and kind of what to do with that information. Costs vary. There has been some funding available this year, but that has now run out. There may or may not be more funding for soil sampling. Carbon audits. Every farm by 2028 will need to have a carbon audit. If you're in a scheme like Red Tractor, for example, you might already be having to do this. There's lots of different tools and platforms that you can use. Some are free, like the Farm Carbon Toolkit is free. AgriCalc, you have to pay an annual subscription. So it kind of ranges. The FAS website, again, has a few that it recommends. Soil Association Exchange, which I'll mention later on, also has the facility to do this. Again, if you've got an existing audit already that is still valid, you can use that. FAS may or may not be doing audits again next year. They did a lot of audits this year and was sort of outstripped by demand quite quickly. And the aim of these is to kind of find where your areas of high emissions are. If you've got a lot of kind of machinery use or input use, then looking at ways to reduce those over time. And also areas that, you know, where you've got natural capital, is there sequestration potential, for example. Habitat surveys, I think, will be probably the one that most people have not done. Compared to soil sampling and carbon audits, I think probably more folk are likely to have come across those before. Habitat surveys are going to be probably a new thing for more people. Again, by 2028, every farm and croft will need to have a biodiversity audit or habitat map, which is what that's going to look like to start with. There's 3 kind of main ways to do that. Nature Scot are developing an app which is going to be launched next year, hopefully in time for these requirements when they come in place. Again, we've got links that we'll send out afterwards to all of these. So Nature Scot have been testing this app with a range of different farm types to see how well it works. The Rural Payments website also has the land parcel ID system, which on the FAS website with the link that we've shared there has a lot of kind of videos and how-tos on how to set that up and use that. Or will also accept a paper map and crayons if you have a kind of OS map and you can map it out. There is more information on the FAS website, but with the different platforms, they've all got sort of instructions in how to do those. So we've got links to those for further information. And I think over time, in the longer term, they will be hoping that people will be doing these habitat surveys or habitat maps and looking at the condition of the habitat, and is there anything that you can do to improve the habitat, or link to funding, for example, for improvements for peatland restoration, for example, that could be linked up. It doesn't need to be too complicated for each land parcel or each field. They're looking for just the main habitat type, so that could be grassland, moorland, buffer strips, riparian strips, wetland. There's some good videos on how to do this as well. And again, in the future, it could link up into sort of green finance payments or that sort of thing. The integrated pest management plan should be completed by anybody that uses plant protection products, that's pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, and there's different plans for arable, grassland and horticulture. The Plant Health Centre website, which we can share a link for, is a good place to start. That's got a kind of set out all the different types of plans. And again, if you're in like Red Tractor or Scottish Quality Crops, you might already be doing this as part of your operation. And if you're organic, you'll already have a crop management plan, which is equivalent to this. So you wouldn't need to do this again separately. A big kind of aim for the IPM plan is to look at where you can be using like habitat features to mitigate where you're currently using chemical inputs, if you can reduce those, looking at the kind of whole farm scale, and at the same time boosting biodiversity. If you're sort of thinking you can put in beetle banks somewhere, or flower margin strips, and the image there is probably not big enough to see, but we'll send it around in the slides, and I'll keep going because I'm realizing I'm kind of short on time. And I'll make sure I give enough time to John, but we'll make sure we share these slides so you can sort of look at it in more detail. And then the last one is the Animal Health and Welfare Plan, and this applies to all livestock keepers, and I think it's any number of livestock. If you're already a member of QMS, for example, or a quality assurance scheme, you might already be doing this. The Scottish Government and SAC platform is called Scottish Animal Health Planning System. Their website also has an app that is interactive and can link to your vet if you haven't started one of these kind of plans already. And there's sort of different templates that we will send links to some of those to look at and more information. And it has to include, with all of these kind of templates having them already as well, things like disease risk assessment, health management calendars for when you're doing different operations, a euthanasia policy, what you do with fallen stock, and to demonstrate veterinary input. So it doesn't have to be signed off by a vet, but it looks for sort of evidence of veterinary input. Or if you're in a crofting area, you can evidence that a vet has been, for example, to your common grazing group, if not you individually. And some of the benefits of this, apart from improving livestock welfare, can be to reduce emissions if you're sort of, for example, more efficient with calving windows, and reducing disease risk kind of improves your profitability as well. So with all of this information that you're gathering, what's the point, kind of thing, as apart from being a box ticking exercise? Using all of these plans together, there isn't a template for a whole farm plan as a document. It's not quite the same as an integrated land management plan, for example. There's not sort of one document, but taking all of these things together could help to set goals, for example, for building resilience by building your soil health, having shelter belts, sort of integrating your different bits of your farm or croft or enterprise, to sort of build resilience, be more resilient to pest and disease. Looking at renewable energy. I don't know, John, if you might mention that. I see you've got solar panels in your picture behind you, so that might come up. And looking at how sort of soil health and habitats and pest management and nutrient management can all sort of fit together and impact on profitability and resilience. So I'll not kind of go through all of that. It's too many words on a slide, I know. But there's a link associated with this slide that is to a report about whole farm planning that John features in, so we'll send the link round to that as well. And I just want to quickly flag up Soil Association Exchange, which is a platform that launched through Soil Association about a year and a half ago, and I think now has about 1,000 farms using the platform, and it goes through all of the 5 elements and a couple of others in this platform. And if you use Soil Association Exchange, you're covered for the soil testing and the carbon footprinting part of the whole farm plan. It has a free element, and then it's got a paid for version as well. So there's a lot of different features, but I just want to highlight the Learning Hub. That's accessible if you're on the free version, or if you haven't registered, you can still access the Learning Hub. And there's a lot of information there of, I've taken a soil sample and what do I do with these results, and building fertility and that kind of thing. Lots of different information on different topics there. So just to kind of flag that up, that might be a useful thing to look into for some people. And this is a map of a farm where we're going to be doing a farm walk in January, on the 16th of January. So we'll send a link to sign up for that if you're in the central belt of Scotland, because we'll be sort of looking at his whole farm planning and his plans going forward. So that felt like a real whistle stop. I think I talked really fast there, so apologies if that was a bit of a info dump. But that's the sort of summary of the 5 areas of the whole farm plan. So we're very quickly, no, we don't need to do the poll just now. I'm very quickly going to hand over to John, who you've got sort of 20-ish minutes. I'll stop sharing my screen just now. And let you share your screen, and we'll hear from John, and keep putting your questions in the chat, and then we'll come to all of those at the end, and chat about what it looks like in practice and get people's questions. Right, I'll stop talking.
Thanks, Colleen. You've packed an awful lot into a little bit of time, and I'm going to try and do the same. So I'm going to try and speak quickly and explain what we're about. What I would say is that restoring rural resilience has been a theme of our family farming business for a long time. We've discovered recently that we are also regenerative, so that's very exciting. And WFP, whether it's Wheeland Farming Partnership, we do whole farm planning as well. So I'm just going to tell you all about that, and hopefully on the way through explain why we've been so keen and where we've seen the benefits of recording data and using data in the business. So this is Woodend today. Fundamentally, we're a family farming business. Our family have been here since 1931, and Louise, my wife, and I, and then luckily my son Donald took it over, took it out, and I've taken it on since 2009. So what do? We grow winter oats for Quakers. We grow winter wheat, which goes for milling or is fed to our own hens. We were growing beans for human consumption, and now we feed them all to our hens instead of buying in soya. And we were growing spring barley for malting, but we find that we're now feeding it all to our hens. And my wife Louise is a field botanist, and when we took it over, she was very concerned about the environmental impact and the biodiversity. So for a long time, we've worked hard to deal with that. And we're well on the road to net zero. I'm going to talk about that as well. That's a picture of Woodend, by the way, behind there. and we've replaced oil with biomass. We did that about 2009. We've put in a wind turbine and solar, and I'm going to talk about that. We produce more power than we consume, but it's intermittent because it's wind and solar, so we're in the process of adding batteries. I could envisage us having up to 1 megawatt of wind and solar in total on the farm within the next 3 or 4 years. It's a hard road to tread, and I'm going to explain why and how we did that. And these are Louise. We've put in, every field's got 5-meter margins. We've put beetle banks into all of our fields. We find that helps with pollination of beans and other things and reduces our pesticide input. It also makes you a lot happier when you're walking around your farm to see things like that. We put on a free-range egg unit when my son came home from college, and that has the added benefit of dropping 40 acres of free range into the middle of the farm. And we've a lot of native trees. We do agroforestry. We planted species-rich grassland. This is some of these photos are from a while ago, but the one behind me in the screen shows where we are. There's the same one. We put solar panels in the range too. The hens, we have problems with seagulls and buzzards and other things. They like somewhere to hide. And all that's working. And we do other things as well. My vision of my future was that I was going to spend more time looking after bees and making cider, but I'm going to tell you what I do instead. Our cider's really good, but it's too strong, so we're trying to mitigate that as well. But instead of doing that, I spend a lot of time in the office, and it seems to be compliance, and that's what Colleen's talking about and what we're getting pushed by our suppliers. So we are line code producers. We get audited by Freedom Foods, by Scottish Quality Cereals. We have to comply with all of the ScotGov regulations. We now have to do whole farm planning, apparently, although we're doing it anyway. And the office burden is significant, and it takes up a lot of my time and other people's time. And trying to do it is important. Trying to get benefits out of it's even more important. So we fill in the farm carbon calculator, and we do that for different schemes required or have required different carbon calculators. The Cool Farm tool and other things. This is the soil carbon calculator, and we started doing it in earnest in 2016. Really was the first time we did a whole farm carbon audit, and this, I don't know if you can see it very well, but when we did it the first time, we realized that the bulk of our carbon emissions were coming from bought in fuel and fertilizer, and also bought in paying for electricity. So this is, here is growing oats. You can see this is Wood End, this is the standard, and it's because we've put in so much renewables. We're using our poultry manure as far as we can to feed our crops. We're not buying much inorganic fertilizers in. We haven't bought phosphate, potash, or lime for 8 years now, and we're working hard. We're just trying to introduce a bokashi fermentation system to retain more of the phosphate and nitrogen in the fertilizer value in the manure and use it more cost effectively. So there's things you can do, but if you don't measure it, you don't know what you can reduce. Carbon, to me, is all about cost. Any carbon emissions are always costing you money, because you're buying in fertilizer, you're buying in pesticides, you're buying in fuel, or you're buying in feed. And this was in 2020, and you can see the biggest source of our emissions by then, because we dealt with electricity, we'd reduced our fuel, we've done as much as, and our manure management's well on the positive side, but purchased feed was the biggest issue that we had, and we've been trying to address that. So we did that. We started mixing our own feed and using as much of the feed that we could produce ourselves. And as you saw, it's the bought-in soya oil and soya meal and sunflower. And where does that come from? Well, the sunflowers predominantly were coming, and probably still are coming, from Ukraine. The soya comes from South America. We get audited to bits. Had a Tesco audit. We had to find the farmer in the field that this came from and demonstrate it was indeed sustainable and not from a non-sustainable source. So we can trace it all the way back. But it represents probably 50% of the cost, but 80% of the emissions on the farm. We started, this is back in 2020-21, trying to find ways of producing more homegrown protein. This is a Scottish SRUC report. The key thing here is that the most effective way to mitigate carbon emissions is to grow your own protein and use precision farming to reduce your costs. And at that time, growing your own protein was the most expensive option that was there, but it was also the best way to reduce carbon. For all you tractor fiends out there, this is a very large John Deere tractor direct drilling beans to subsidies. Stop doing that because it's too noisy. And then the picture on the right there is harvesting a mixture of lentils and barley on what was the hottest September day on record, recorded at Charter Hall nearby. And you can see the wee salt tire drawn by the aeroplane in behind. But anyway, that's us trying to find ways to reduce our protein import, to reduce our carbon footprint, but also to reduce our costs, because homegrown feed has been always cheaper than imported feed. So that was lentils and barley. This was beans and peas grown together. This is peas and barley. So we've tried all of these intercropping mixes. This is some of the samples that we had. We were paying for all this ourselves. We couldn't get any external help at all, and at least it appeared to me we couldn't, any useful help about what was the best protein to grow, what's best for the hens, because feeding peas and beans to hens, it was hardly researched at all. It was all old news. And it's not appropriate for us to be doing that. It should be being done by the collectively. So we're very pleased and delighted to be part of the NCS, the Nitrogen Climate Smart project, which is the first time for me that I've seen farmers being involved in multiple projects and steering research towards what we as farmers need, and with the agencies working in that way. And this is a £6 million DEFRA funded project. It's got loads of partners in it. It's got lots of farmers actively doing it, doing on-field, on-farm trials and sharing that information, having it analysed and confirmed by external bodies like ADAS and PGRO and others. And it's focused around the cost and maintaining profitability and the mitigating greenhouse gas emissions. This is something that we should all be part of. And there's other things that we're trying to do here at the moment, like trying to bokashi fermentation of manure. Where do you go to get advice? We shouldn't be having to do experiments at would end. We should be able to access data. We should be part of wider farmers sharing information. But the NCS project has been, for me, the first time, and it is turning into a successful innovation. And as a farmer, you can sign up for it. You can become a Pulse Pioneer. They'll pay you. We get paid to do the trials, for the work that we do. We share our information and we speak to other farmers and try to work out what's to do for the best and get proper scientific support. We've had 5 years of feeding beans. We're part of this network. We're collaborating and sharing the data. We're about to enter our next year of doing field scale trials here at Woodend, but I know lots of other farmers that are doing it. There's an excellent conference in January, which is run by the PGRO as part of the NCS outreach. It's called From Soya to Sustainability, I believe, and it's about trying to have more homegrown protein. I would urge anyone who can be involved in that to participate. This is us using a drone to oversow white clover into, we had it, half was beans, half was spring oats, and to try and determine what the benefits were. I was trying to get a clover understory, so when I direct drilled the wheat behind the beans, it would the clover would die back a bit. It would give up some of its nitrogen over the course, and it would also provide a bit of cover crop. Anyway, we're still trying to do that, and these are things that we're doing and sharing with other farmers. The critical role of all of this is that data is the backbone of projects. It's what we need to share. It's the information we need. So this thing of whole farm planning, this benchmarking that Colleen's talked about, this is what you need to do on your own farm, in my opinion, and what we need to do and share to try and identify where we're leaking carbon, where we're leaking money, and find ways of becoming more resilient and more sustainable. And the NCS project is an excellent example of how that can be done. I'll keep rushing on. We've been involved in the Soil Association Exchange since its inception. Our score 65 out of 100, and I'll still argue that we do more, that our score should be higher, but arguments don't count. It has to be done by measuring things. So we get advice from SAE and we take it and we implement it, because in my experience, if you benchmark, if you look at where the leakages and opportunities are, then you can address it. Then you can make your farm more resilient. You can rely less on external parties, and you can reduce your costs and improve your profitability, or maintain or achieve profitability in some cases, because profitability is the key to resilience. And that data-driven approach, this is where it's all about. It's the way to insulate yourself from some of the issues that come with climate change. This element here, I think Colleen talked about getting a reward for green work. I am working hard, we're working hard to identify and benchmark our farm to see what carbon we're storing, and I'm trying to inset it into the products that we have. And I'm trying to persuade people that we should be paid for doing that, because it's an extra service, this regeneration of the biodiversity, creating these margins, storing carbon. And if we're measuring it, then if it's measured, then it could be paid for. This leaf sustainer, we have to do this because we produce milling oats for Quaker, and to do that, you have to be in leaf. I'm about to start filling all these things in again. I've filled them in already for Soil Association Exchange. I've filled them in for Safitra. I've filled them in for so many people. The collection and management of data, it's the bane of my life. But we do it because you have to do it. But it would be a lot easier if we didn't have to do it on so many platforms and so many places for so many different people who ultimately don't pay you very much for doing it. The benefit of being a leaf registered producer and selling oats to Quakers, you get £4 a tonne more than you would do if you sold it to Mooring Foods. Well, £4 isn't very much. And now what we're doing, this is with Safitra, we've joined Soil Capital, so we've joined Soil Association Exchange, we're doing stuff for other people. The reason for doing this is to allow us to inset the carbon saving we're getting from being min-till, from the way that, from not ploughing, from all the effort we're making to build back the soil, to put more carbon into the soil. And I'm trying to inset that into the eggs and the other things that we produce. And it is the case that we farmers, assuming the farmers here, that we have to own what we're doing. We own it's our data, it's our hard work. There's lots of people looking in, demanding that we do this, we do that, but fundamentally there's only us here. All I've got is this. I've got these eggs, you know. I mean, there's no more eggs at the end of the day, whether I do biodiversity whole farm recording or not. The wheat that I grow, this is wheat. It's you know, it doesn't matter. Oh, it disappears on the screen. It's all there is. There's no more wheat. There's no more beans. There's no more eggs. No matter how much time I spend in my office, no matter how many questions I'm asked or how much carbon. So we need to be paid for the work that we're doing here. And carbon, there's just more of the soil capital thing. So I'm going to tell you a bit more about Weed End and what we've done, and I perhaps I'm a bit frustrated at all the efforts that we're making and the fact that it's not necessarily being recognised in the way that I feel would be appropriate. But when we took Louise and I took the farm on, it was very typical of many farms of its time. We're using lots of fertilizer, lots of electricity, lots of red diesel. We were spending in those days about £125,000 a year that all went straight down the road to Scottish Power, Scottish Fuels, Norsk Hydro, you name it. Dead money, and it leaves us vulnerable and it removes resilience. And all of those things are equally responsible for carbon emissions at that time. And we've worked really hard to get on top of all of that. So it's
just give you a 7-minute heads up.
Splendid. I'm never going to manage that. So this is us today, and what we did was we put on renewables to try and mitigate the carbon emissions. We're spending a lot of money on infrastructure to use them most efficiently. We've just had a new grid connection put in. We're now putting in batteries and trying to deal with intermittency. We're looking and trying to find ways to fund all of that, and that's always entertaining. This is our energy summary since 2016. We're actually 100%, we produce more power than we consume, but because it's intermittent, we're still having we pack eggs in the morning, and at the moment it's often not, it's never sunny, and it's often not windy, so we have to buy an electricity to do that. So putting a battery in makes real sense for us. By doing the benchmarking, by measuring the carbon emissions, by looking at your costs, you can see where you can save money, and you can find ways to utilize that. And that really builds the environmental and long-term benefits. We put in a biomass boiler and we burn straw, and we use it to heat all the houses, dry all of our grain. We even dry wood chips from time to time. It's just it's just a big kettle, burn 4 bales of straw, heat up 100 tons of water to 75 or 80 degrees, pump it round the farm. That's us drying beans. It's a joy. This year, that was 2 years ago when the weather was good. This year, the beans did not stack up like that. They were absolutely soaking. We've made the mistake of weighing one trailer that came in that was supposed to be a 15-ton trailer. The beans were so wet, I thought it was nearly 30 tons. We'd only put half as many in, because this has been a hellish year, but we're past it now. That's the dryer, so it's just a big radiator with a fan blowing warm air into the beans. We do district heating. It saves us money. We have to pay for the straw. The fact is, we wouldn't bale the straw unless we were either going to burn it or for fuel and put the ash back in the field, or mixing it in with our manure. Now, we wouldn't sell it. We would keep it on the farm. There's a lot of stuff about straw. But let's talk about whole farm planning, because that's what this meeting's about. It's a holistic approach. It integrates the whole things that you're doing. It allows you to identify where you're looking carbon and you're looking cash and address that. But it's not new. This is a photo taken in 1976. And if you look here, this is a palisaded enclosure from 3,500 years ago. So there's been regenerative farming on this site for 3,500 years. This guy here has the same worries that I have. He's wondering how the hell he's going to make all these cattle pay, whether his hens are doing well. If he's not getting enough for his eggs, there's some gadget living on a fort up in the hill that's telling him, giving him some protection and telling him what to do. And this process of farmers, regenerative is about trying to make where you are better and leaving a better heart for the next generation. Doesn't matter if you're organic, if you're biodynamic, if you call it what you like, we're all regenerative. We're all doing the same thing. This map here, this is was mapped in the 12th century, first map. It was done by Pont. He said this is when it was ploughed by oxen before the Enclosures Act. It said the Merse, well blessed with pastures, nourished with fertile soils and numerous inhabitants, in peace industrious, in war stout-hearted, well used to defending their land and possessions most bravely against the English. So no change there then. And then this map here is taken from Langton Estate. It shows the introduction of new technologies. For those of you who are historians, it's the time of the lowland clearances, when all the cotters, more than 2/3 of the people were cleared off the land and went away to work in the mills and Hoyk and everywhere else, and farms like these were built. Then this is when my grandfather took it over, 1931. There was a pond, there was no power, there was no electricity, the power didn't come here till 1937, and it was all done by horses. Everything they needed then was won off the farm, and there was very few inputs. It was all firewood was gotten, oats for men and horses. People grew things in their own gardens, didn't buy very much in. This is the farm as I took it over in 2009. This is when I was spending all my money with Scottish Power and Scottish Fuels and everything else, and leaking carbon like mad. And this is us today, working towards net zero. Poultry unit, lots of solar, lots of windmills, using our resources better, getting everything that we can off the place, working hard to mitigate it. And so this is what we do here. This is a beetle bank. We plant annual. Everybody loves annual flowers because it makes the cornfield annuals marvelous. But they only last 1 year. But they look great when you put them in. That's a beetle bank in a field. We're trying to integrate all of our businesses. We're trying to identify the holistic benefit of farming it together. Any single enterprise on this farm struggles on its own. It's only the interrelated nature of it all, including having a beetle bank across the middle of the field like that. When you plant it with beans, it increases the yield by about 20% because the native pollinators move out into the crops and they control pests and they pollinate the crop and produce more beans. There's so many good things in running your farm that way. This is a typical multi-species margin at Weedend. Make room for nature, enhance biodiversity. It makes you happier if nothing else. There's nothing nicer, better than walking around your farm. It's good for your well-being, but it makes a big difference to your bottom line as well, as long as it's being properly quantified and measured. And there are so many challenges. Climate change is the biggest one that we see. Trying to adapt and be resilient for that is really hard, and not being exposed to the vagaries. The terrible war in Ukraine exposed so many shortcomings. It showed that being resilient, being able to win things off your own farm, having your own heated power really helps, being able to get your own fertilizer. I am certain that I'm not receiving a reasonable recognition for the efforts that we make or other farmers that make. People that perceive farmers as being people that have pulled out hedges and done other things. That hasn't happened in Berwickshire in any way at all meaningful form. It's been reversed over the last 10 years. People are putting in so much effort, planting margins, having green cover crops, going to min-till, mitigating their pesticide use, putting in renewables. We're working hard at it, and I don't think it's being properly recognised and rewarded at the moment. This is where I think, with my sunny uplands, this is what I've spent ages is trying to build Weedend into a family resilient farm that my son and his children and everyone can take on and take forward. From the guy in 3,500 years ago, he wasn't looking to turn it over for tax benefits or doing else. He was just trying to make it better and make sure his family thrived and survived. And it allows us to look after the ecosystems as we go as well. So these are the things that I would like to leave with you to think about and why it's worth doing that. Building a resilient, regenerative, we're all regenerative. There's a lot of being politicized a bit at the moment, but it's just try to take what you've got and make it better, no matter what system you're using. Using whole farm planning for resilience and profitability. That's why I did it. I wasn't doing it because the Scottish Government told me to do it, and I guess whole farm planning has gone on here at Weedend for 3,500 years, and it'll be going on in another 1,000 years, hopefully, if we don't do anything too bad in the meantime. And what we need from policymakers are practicable, equitable policies. We need to have things, and policymakers aren't just the people in Holyrood or Westminster. It's in our room. If you have a discussion about what we're going to do for farmers, there'll be 2 farmers, there'll be people in the processing and packing and retail end. There's so many people in there. They need to take care of the farmers and the farming industry. And we need consumers to champion and reward farmers, to recognise what it is that we're doing, and for the people who provide us with funding, whether it's subsidy, which I think is a disappearing source of finance anyway. We need to be driven by the marketplace, and we need to have that certainty to allow us to make these long-term commitments. It's a big job deciding to go to min-till and to try to go through that phase of losing yield and losing everything else that goes with it. And we need a fair market, but the fundamental thing is that there needs to be clarity, and there need to be fair prices, and there needs to be meaningful partnerships with the supermarkets and the consumers. And that means speaking to people. That's why I'm here speaking to everybody here today. And I would urge people to go out there and talk about it, because it's, in some ways, farmers have fallen into silos and they need to get back out of them and start to build those linkages. We certainly can't rely on subsidies to keep us going forward. We need to have better understanding with our consumers. That's me, that's the end. I've got nothing else to add to that, and I've said an awful lot, so hopefully you've survived it all, but we're open for questions.
Thank you very much, John. That was, oh, I don't know if there's some people that are not muted. I've got a bit of feedback there. That was an awful lot of information, John. For you did very well to get through that many slides in 25 minutes or so. So thank you. There's a lot in there to unpack, and there's a few questions I think I can see in the chat. But one that kind of, well, yeah, I've kind of got lots of questions that kind of struck me, and I wonder, all the different sort of schemes that you're in and audits and things that you have to do and paperwork that you have to fill out, are there any that are sort of compatible? You know, if you've sort of got the data for carbon or something, that you've got 3 or 4 different ones that you have to fill it out for, are they all kind of different, or are they compatible with each other? Or
no, they're all different. Everyone's got their own scheme. Every supermarket we get inspected by here at Tesco, Marks and Spencers, by Freedom Foods, by the line code inspectors, by the Scottish Government. We have to submit data to all the different people that buy oats, that buy things. They're all on different platforms. It's a nightmare. It's crackers. And the saviour of my life has been using OpenAI to take the data and upload it into other things, but that's no way to live your life. I spend far too much time in the office. My whole family would tell you that, and a lot of it is just repetition. It's not. We're shipping data. I'm shipping information about carbon saving. I'm responding to requests by people further down the food chain that want to mitigate their tier 2 and tier 3 emissions, but I'm not getting paid for it. £4 a tonne for filling in a leaf thing. It's not enough.
Yeah, it's so frustrating, and I think I get that it's a sort of frustration and a worry of people with the whole farm planning things coming up, that it's sort of yet another thing that you have to fill out. And I think what they're hoping is that because they're sort of compatible with multiple different platforms and plans and audit types, that you can kind of, if you're using something already, you can use that to put in your SAF form kind of thing.
I guess my concern at that is that joke about you visit the West Coast Island and they say we used to have 2 churches here. We've had an amalgamation, now we've got 3. That every time somebody tries to mend this, all we end up with is more.
Yeah.
It never gets less. Nobody asks for less.
It's definitely something that needs fixed and streamlined, not more versions of the same thing, because it's not a good use of your time or any farmer or crofter's time to be sitting trying to fill out forms or get data from this thing into that thing. We need you to be outside doing the farming and the land management, not in the office. But the other question that sort of links to that kind of came to my head was all the data that you kind of collect around soil and carbon, for example, habitats, IPM, your pest management. How much of that data do you feel like you use to inform your decision making? So I think there'll be a lot of time that's wasted just kind of footering about with all the different formats and forms and stuff. But with the kind of data, if it was in just one format, do you feel like you have used that over the last few years to inform some of your decisions that have
Well,
got
definitely,
you to where you
definitely with
are?
carbon footprinting. One of the, I don't want to big up the Soil Association, but the Soil Association Exchange, the fact is that whether it's them or it's Scottish Colleges or someone else, having an external third party to look over your data and ask the difficult questions, that to me has been really useful. And it also means that if there is a third party involved doing that, you can identify ways to be better. So the data is there, but getting time to interrogate it. So one of the benefits of having a third party is that you do get tested. And Clive, that looked after us, was quite good at asking difficult questions. And sometimes it's not easy. But then, on the other part, and the reason for having that benchmark and having that data there is that you can't sell you can't insert carbon into a product unless you've got some way of verifying it. So if it's not Soil Association Exchange, then it's Soil Capital or it's Leaf or somewhere else where you can actually show that you are regenerating your farm, that you are sequestering carbon, improving your soil, improving your biodiversity. So yeah, we do use it, but it's just that it's the same information on 3 different platforms. But the underlying thing is the soil improving? Is the carbon emissions and costs being reduced? Are there more pollinators in the hedgerow? And yeah, no, I have used it. Carbon accounting has been really useful. I really regret that we didn't start do a biodiversity baseline 10 years ago, because at that point our hedges were cut within an inch of their lives and there was none there. You know, we've planted over 30 kilometres of hedges and all sorts of things. So it would have made a huge difference if it had that benchmarking. So I think benchmarking is good, because you can't, you know, if you don't know, you can't show where you have to know where you are, where you've come from to be able to show an improvement.
Yeah, I heard a good quote. I think it was from maybe somebody at Nature Scott that said you can't manage what you don't measure. So I think that's a useful way to kind of frame it. That if you're wanting to be managing any bits of your farm, you need to be measuring it. And so aside from the sort of paperwork side, in terms of the kind of measuring, you know, collecting that data or doing like soil samples or the habitat surveying, for example, does that feel like it takes up a lot of time to do, or is it more the kind of faffing about with paperwork that's more of a time suck?
The collecting doing that biodiversity baseline is it's a day. It's not a big deal. Doing it yourself and having somebody else do it for you even more so. But I've always tended to do my own carbon audits, and because Louise is a field botanist, we can do our own.
Very handy.
But in order to validate it, you need to have somebody come in. So you have to have SRUC or Soil Association Exchange or someone come in to validate it, because otherwise you could make anything up, I suppose.
Yeah.
That part doesn't take long, and I don't spend my whole time filling in these forms. In fact, I make a point of not spending a lot of time.
Feels like it.
It just seems that way, yeah. It just the repetition is a pain in the backside.
Yeah.
And whole farm planning's gone on forever. I mean, it's not a new thing. It's being written down, and we're being asked to do it. We need to be rewarded for doing it as well.
Yeah. And do you kind of feel, what do you kind of feel around the role of like private finance, and how that could come in to complement other forms of financial support? Have you had much sort of experience of that, or?
I'm aware of it. I've seen a lot of hill farms sold for planting trees and things, and that may or may not be a good idea. I think that for me, I would just like a fair price for what we do. I would like people to look at the cost that there is involved in producing wheat or oats or eggs on a sustainable way, and I would like to get a fair return. So I want paid for what we do, If we do extra, if we insert carbon into those eggs, or we restore biodiversity, then I want some recognition in the price, and I want to meet my depreciation and cost of finance and get paid a bit for doing that. I'm not looking for a premium. I'm not looking for private finance to own a part of my farm. What I think farmers, producers, smallholders, anybody needs is a fair market and a fair price and a certainty that's going to continue. And that's why I think the Tesco's and the Asda's and the Aldi's and the general consumers need to recognise it and pay for it.
Mm-hmm. I'm aware I'm kind of hogging the questions in the conversation. We've got a couple in the chat there, and I wonder if there's any fresh questions. If people want to use the raise hand function, because I've probably got a lot of folk for shouting out questions, but if anybody's got a question along the tab along the top of your screen, or maybe along the bottom, depending on if you're online or on the thing, there should be a little hand symbol, so you could pop that up if anybody's got questions. And there was a couple at the start around sort of understanding better what's expected of farmers and confidence around doing a whole farm plan. So I hope we've kind of addressed some of that a bit. And there was also a question at the start around managing around rashes, and we've got some resources on that on our website, so I'll find the links. We did a field lab a few years ago on managing rushes and combating rushes, and I noticed there's some good links on the FAS website as well, so we can share those. And there's a question just come in, if anybody knows there's free support to actually do these audits beyond knowledge and information support about it. So the habitat biodiversity audit that Nature Scott are developing an app for, that will be free. Well, thank you, Jane, you've got the Rush link there in the chat. Yeah, the habitat one will be the free app, or you can do it on the Rural Payments website. And the Animal Health and Welfare Plan, if you're part of sort of QMS or a quality assurance scheme, that will be part of that. The Integrated Pest Management Plan is also free on the I can't remember the name of the website, but one of the links that we shared in the chat there, that's a free audit that you can do yourself for integrated pest management. The ones that you need to pay for are the carbon audits and soil testing. There has been this year funding through Scottish Government and through Farm Advisory Service to get those done, but the uptake was, I think, probably more than they expected, and I guess the budget of that was used up. So the funding for carbon audits and soil testing has been paused for the moment. I don't know if there will be more funding next year, or if FAS will be providing, for example, some carbon audits. Some carbon audit platforms are free. I think the Farm Carbon Toolkit, John, I noticed you used that in one of your slides. I think that's a free one, isn't it? Some of them you have to pay and some are free. So for carbon audits, some of them are free, but the soil testing is one that you have to pay for, and the prices vary depending on where you send it to and how many fields you're testing. The Farm Advisory Service website that we shared a link to at the very beginning has links to further information and videos on how to do a soil test yourself. If you do a soil test and send it off to somebody, or like if you take a soil sample and send it to someone for testing, that's cheaper than getting someone to come out and take the samples. So at the moment, the funding that was available has been paused. There may or may not be more funding next year, but for most of these things, apart from soil testing, there are free versions. So yeah. Anna and Jane, are there any other questions that I've missed that you have clocked onto?
Yeah, Clara Shade Poulston has asked if anyone knows whether there's any free support, or is that the
Yeah,
question?
that's
Sorry,
the one
you've
that we've
just
just
answered
done.
that.
That's
And
okay.
Clive Thomas has made a comment about one small integration, which the point you made earlier, Colleen, about that the Scottish Government will accept the data in your exchange dashboard for the whole farm plan, carbon and soil requirements.
Yeah. Yeah, super. So yes, the Soil Association Exchange free version of the platform kind of takes you through all of those areas. You might still need to pay for the soil sampling, but yeah, those are definitely compatible with Scottish Government, and they've sort of designed it deliberately to be compatible with whole farm plan requirements for Scottish Government. So that's maybe a useful one to look at. But yeah, in the follow-up email that we'll send around, we'll put links to sort of all the different platforms and more information on especially Farm Advisory Service and Scottish Government websites. Because yeah, kind of starting at this point, there's quite a lot of information to kind of wade through for all the different 5 areas. There's sort of, for each one, there's different places that you can go to use as a platform to record, or different ways to do it. So through the rest of this series, we'll be kind of looking at each of these different areas in a bit more detail, going into it in a bit more depth, kind of, how you do soil sampling, for example. And so do kind of follow our website on upcoming events, and the resources page we'll be adding to as we go, with kind of practical resources and blogs and videos and things. So we'll keep sharing information about that, and if people are interested, we can sort of keep doing emails with more information as it comes through. And thank you, Clive, for sharing the link for Essay Exchange. And John, do you think there's any other bits of your kind of whistle stop that you didn't get to that you would have liked to expand more? Or is that a dangerous question to ask?
I'm vexed I didn't get to show enough of the things that we've done, but no, it's fine. I'm sure. No is the short answer. Unless there's something anyone's particularly interested in.
Yeah. There's another question that I'll just read it out quickly from Clara, also wondering what John's experience is with doing soil analysis and testing in terms of being able to use that in decision making about farm management. Particularly curious about John's insights on measuring organic matter and what you do to assess nitrogen requirements.
So we've measured, we've done soil testing since before year 2000, and we've got data year on year. So we typically test a fifth of the farm every year. We've measured organic material and everything else. We're seeing I would describe us as farming the biome now. We're in the middle of trying to work out how to do bokashi fermentation to build more carbon and more life back into our soils, and reduce the amount of bought-in nitrogen and other things that we have. And what we've done, even more so during when the price of nitrogen fertilizer went up so much, but we were doing it anyway. So now what we tend to do is we test the available nitrogen in the soil at the start of the season. We apply some inorganic nitrogen, but we then do leaf tissue analysis, and then we do a final top up, and we use as much of our own manure for fertilizer as we possibly can. And that's why we're looking at bokashi fermentation, to try and mitigate and minimize the ammonia emissions from the poultry manure and turn it into a more usable form and be able to use it at the times of year when we really need it. So in the spring. So on Friday of this week, for the first time, we're about to mix poultry litter with straw and put it in a bag in the end of the field with Agriferm inoculant to try and do anaerobic digestion and capture nitrogen. And I wish to goodness I could find some sources of assistance and support for doing that, because it's be helpful. But no, we're definitely looking at our soil analysis on a year-on-year basis. We can record a steady, significant improvement in all of the key things that we're maintaining our pH at or around 6.5, where our phosphate, potash, and all our indices are in the right place, and by actively managing our nitrogen and by doing tissue analysis as well as soil testing. And we're getting the cost of the soil testing and the tissue analysis back in the savings that we have by being able to apply our fertilizer on a more targeted basis. Precision farming is the way forward. It's the way to mitigate emissions as far as I can see.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, good to kind of note that what's the word I'm looking for? But yeah, good to know that the savings that you make from reducing input costs covers the cost of the soil testing. Because I think if you've not done any soil testing before and you think, oh, I've got to do a few fields, it kind of adds up. But if you're able to then save money down the line, that's good to know. There's another question about agroforestry. Will would be interested to hear about John's experience with this. Did you plant new trees and did you get any support for this? And have you found it beneficial to do agroforestry?
So our agroforestry is predominantly on the poultry range, and no, we didn't get any support. And we did it to provide cover for the hens and to give more diversity in the range. We are, Clive is on this call. So we're going to start planting individual trees into the beetle banks that we put in there. We're not going to plant hedges because there's a lot of management in hedges. And my wife, as a botanist, is very keen to remind me that hedges are valuable, but having a lot of beetle banks with lots of things in it are equally valid. So we're going to start putting trees into the beetle banks, but we're not brave enough to put them into the crops or anywhere else at the moment. But no, it's been a good thing. I can see the benefit of having them around the fields and having more trees and hedge plants. But we've planted an awful lot. We've planted thousands of ash trees, and they've all got bloody ash. And it's heartbreaking. Because they were all just getting to, they're all 7 or 8 years old and they're all disappearing again. So that's been a bit of a bugger.
Oh, that's a shame. And there's one more question, and then I think we'll do the quick wrap-up poll after that if there's no more burning questions. The final one, John, do you feel like the Scottish Government is listening to farmers like yourself about the realities of investing in these changes to your farming system and the compliance required as the support system is changing? If not, what's your biggest ask or easy wins that could be implemented by the government?
I'm quite jealous of some of the support schemes that are available in Northumberland that aren't available in the borders. For some of the things that we do, like the margins, that you can only get through AICS, and it's such a small pot of money. So the change, I think that the role of subsidies are falling because of the lack of available funding for public goods. I think that's a pressure that the Scottish Government's going to be under, and I can't see. I'm glad I'm not having to resolve that. And I feel that from the support I would like is support to do the things that are long-term common good investments, like in restoring biodiversity and other things. And I would like support in the form of not even grants, but long-term interest-free loans to do things like put in a bean dehuller so I can feed more beans and buy less soya, and that would be a great thing to have. And they're easy wins from a Scottish Government perspective. I think government policy should be focusing on fair markets and recognising the need for those. And I think it's a source of tension that there's not enough money to go around to subsidise people. I don't think that subsidies necessarily translate into real benefit in the long term. They just subsidise the markets and allow them to pay us less. and they don't necessarily create the innovation and the technology change that we need. If the world's changing to do these things, fair markets and access to funds to put in the plant and equipment and make the change that we need. I've got a plough and a combination drill that cost £34,000. 15 years ago, it would still go for another 10 years. And if I'm doing min-till, I can't use it. And to replace it, it would cost, even for the drill alone, £85,000, and a tractor to pull it's 100,000. So one of the downsides of a change like this to min-till is that we can't afford to do that. We have to work with our neighbours and do other things.
Interesting.
Up in everybody's screen or not. Yeah, thank you everybody for your participation, your questions, your listening. Thanks so much to John for your thoughts and experience and all your pictures. If you are going to ORFC, Oxford Real Farming Conference in January, you can see John speaking there. Say hello to him while you're there if you're going in January. If not, come to our farm walk in Fife, and you can look forward to follow up links and slides and information from us, and keep following our upcoming stuff next year. And it would be great to get feedback if you think there's any farms that we should visit, topics that we should talk about in more detail. Drop us a line, and we'll wrap up there. Thanks very much, everybody. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you very much.